God named two people. Then he went silent for 400 years. Malachi chapter 4, verses 4 through 6, the last lines of the Old Testament, the last words of the prophetic voice before heaven closed. And God says, "Remember the law of Moses, my servant. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet." Moses and Elijah, the last two names God mentions before the longest silence in biblical history. 400 years without a prophet, 400 years without a voice from heaven, 400 years of darkness. And when that silence is finally broken, when God finally acts again in human history, there is a mountain in Galilee where exactly those two people appear. Moses and Elijah, standing, visible, glorified, speaking with Jesus. That is not coincidence. That is not narrative decoration. What happened on that mountain is one of the most calculated scenes in the entire Bible, loaded with legal, prophetic, and emotional significance. And most preachers tell it as if it was simply a pretty moment where Jesus glowed. No. What happened there was a trial, a hearing, and official certification from heaven. And there are three hidden layers in this scene that almost nobody preaches. The third one will leave you speechless. But to get there, you need to know what was happening in Jesus' life 6 days before he went up that mountain. Because those 6 days change everything. 6 days before the Transfiguration, something happened that changed everything. Matthew 16, verse 13, Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi, a place most believers overlook, but that is absolutely crucial for understanding what comes next. Caesarea Philippi wasn't just any Jewish town. It was a center of pagan worship, built at the base of a massive rock, where there was a cave the Greeks called the Gate of Hades. Literally, the locals believed that cave was the entrance to the underworld. And it was exactly there, in front of the Gate of Hades, that Jesus asked the most important question of his ministry. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered. Matthew 16, verse 16, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." In front of the gate of death, Peter declares life. In front of the temple of false gods, Peter identifies the true one. And Jesus doesn't correct the answer, he confirms it. "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." But notice what happens immediately after. Verse 21. From that time Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day. It's the first time in the entire Gospel of Matthew that Jesus openly announces his death. The first time. And he does it seconds after Peter identifies him as the Messiah, as if to say, "Yes, I am the Christ, and the Christ must die." Peter's reaction is immediate. Verse 22. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." Peter, the same one who just received a direct revelation from the Father, now tries to correct the Son. And Jesus' response is one of the harshest in all of Scripture. Verse 23, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Stop here for a second. Imagine what those 6 days between Caesarea Philippi and the Transfiguration must have been like for Jesus. He had just announced for the first time that he was going to die. His main disciple, his rock, had just tried to dissuade him. And Jesus had to identify that voice as satanic. The emotional weight of that moment is hard to calculate. And notice that Jesus didn't simply say, "I'm going to die." He said he must. The Greek word is de. It indicates divine necessity, theological obligation. It wasn't a possibility, it was a destiny. And he described it with a precision that must have chilled their blood. Suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed. Jesus named his executioners before he met them. He knew exactly who would condemn him, and still he walked toward them. Now think about what Peter did. He took Jesus aside. The Greek verb is proslabomenos. It means he grabbed him, pulled him to one side. Peter, a fisherman from Galilee, grabbed the arm of the Son of God and told him he was wrong. The audacity of that gesture is hard to exaggerate, and Jesus' response, calling him Satan, reveals something many overlook. The temptation to avoid the cross didn't come only from the desert. It came from the people who loved him most. That makes the temptation infinitely harder to resist. It's easy to reject the devil when you recognize him. But when the devil speaks through the mouth of your best friend, with tears in his eyes and genuine concern for you, the line blurs. Jesus was fully God, yes, but he was also fully human. Hebrews 4 verse 15, he was in all points tempted as we are. That includes fear, it includes emotional uncertainty, it includes the human need for confirmation. And those 6 days must have been the longest of his ministry, walking with 12 men who didn't understand, carrying the weight of an announcement that marked him as condemned, knowing that every step brought him closer to Jerusalem, to the scourging, to the nails. And now hold that thought, because what happened 6 days later on the top of that mountain has everything to do with this. Matthew 17 verse 1. Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves. Only 3. Of the 12, only 3 go up. And they're not just any 3. They are the same 3 who will be with him in Gethsemane the night before the cross. Peter, James, and John, the witnesses of the glory, would be the same witnesses of the agony. That is not coincidence. God was preparing witnesses for both extremes of his Son's experience, the highest peak and the darkest valley, and the same eyes that saw the light of Tabor would see the sweat of blood in the garden. But there's something more about that number that almost nobody notices. 6 days. Matthew says 6 days later. 6 days after what? After Caesarea Philippi, after the announcement of death, after the rebuke of Peter. Now, where else in the Bible does a period of 6 days appear before a divine revelation on a mountain? Exodus 24, verse 16. Now the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. 6 days of waiting before Moses entered the presence of God on Sinai. 6 days of waiting before Jesus went up to the Mount of Transfiguration. Matthew is building a deliberate parallel, and this is about to get much deeper in the next few minutes. Verse 2 of Matthew 17 says something extraordinary. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. The Greek word Matthew uses for transfigured is metamorpho, from which the word metamorphosis comes. It's not a change of external appearance. It's not like putting on a costume. Metamorpho describes a change that comes from inside out. What the disciples saw was not Jesus putting on a suit of glory. It was Jesus ceasing to contain the glory he always had within. For 33 years, divinity had been compressed inside a human body. On that mountain, for an instant, the compression relaxed, and what came out was sun. But here comes something that's going to change the way you see this entire scene. Look at how Matthew describes Jesus' face. It shone like the sun. Now read Exodus 34 verse 29. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. Moses' face shone because he had been in the presence of God. It was a reflected glow, like the moon reflects the light of the sun. But Jesus' face didn't reflect an external light. His face was the source of the light. Moses shone by contact. Jesus shone by identity. And that difference is theologically devastating, because when Moses and Elijah appear on that mountain, they are standing beside the source of the very glory that Moses once only reflected. The mirror was standing before the sun, And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Verse 3. They appeared. The Greek word is ophthe. The same word used in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 5 for the appearances of the risen Jesus. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a dream. It was a real, bodily, verifiable appearance. Moses and Elijah were physically present on that mountain. But let's get to the question everyone asks, and almost nobody answers well. Why Moses and Elijah? Of all the Old Testament characters, why exactly those two? The traditional answer says Moses represents the law and Elijah represents the prophets. And yes, that's true, but it's only the first layer. And if you stop there, you miss the most important part. There's a second layer that has to do with something that happened in the life of each of them. Both had an encounter with God on a mountain, and not just any mountain, the same mountain. Moses received the law on Mount Sinai, Exodus chapters 19 through 34. Elijah fled to Mount Horeb after his confrontation with the prophets of Baal, 1 Kings 19 verse 8. And Horeb and Sinai are the same place, two names for the same mountain. The two men who had had the closest experience with the presence of God on a mountain were now on another mountain, face to face with God incarnate. But the connection goes deeper than geography. Pay very close attention to this. When Moses was on Sinai, he asked to see the glory of God. Exodus 33, verse 18. Please show me your glory. And what did God answer? Verse 20. You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. God had to hide Moses in the cleft of a rock and pass by, covering his eyes with his hand. Moses could only see the back of God, never his face. When Elijah was on Horeb, he experienced something similar. 1 Kings 19 verses 11 and 12. A great wind that tore the rocks, but the Lord was not in the wind. An earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle. Again, a man who cannot see God face to face. And now, on the Mount of Transfiguration, both are standing before the uncovered face of God. No cleft of rock, no mantle covering their eyes. No wind or earthquake or fire, just a face. The face of the sun shining like the sun. What Moses asked for on Sinai and didn't receive, he now receives. What Elijah covered on Horeb, he now beholds without a veil. The God who spoke from the burning bush, the God who passed before the cleft of the rock, that God now has a face, and that face shines like the sun. And the two men who could never see him finally see him face to face. But there's a third layer, and this is the one almost nobody preaches. Listen carefully. Both Moses and Elijah had a moment in their lives where they wanted to quit. Moses, in Numbers 11 verse 15, says to God, I am not able to bear all these people alone, because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now. Moses asked to die. The man who faced Pharaoh, the man who parted the Red Sea, the man who went up Sinai for 40 days without eating or drinking, that man reached a point where he said, I'd rather be dead than continue with this. And what caused that breakdown? The people were complaining. They wanted meat. They were crying over the cucumbers and onions of Egypt. Numbers 11 verse 5. We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. The people for whom Moses had sacrificed everything were missing the food of slavery. And that shattered something inside him. It wasn't an epic battle that broke Moses. It was the constant complaints, the daily wear, the chronic ingratitude. Elijah had his moment in 1 Kings 19. He had just won the most spectacular confrontation in the Old Testament. Mount Carmel, 450 prophets of Baal against one single prophet of God. And God answered with fire. 1 Kings 18 verse 38. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood and the stones and the dust. and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Total victory, absolute victory. And the next day, Jezebel sends him a message. So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. 1 Kings 19 verse 2. A threat, a single threat after the greatest victory of his life. And Elijah ran. He fled to the desert. He sat under a broom tree and said, "It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life." What shattered Elijah wasn't defeat. It was the emptiness after victory. It was discovering that winning didn't change anything, that Jezebel was still on the throne, that the people were still divided, that the victory at Carmel didn't produce the revival he expected. Post-victory depression is one of the most devastating experiences of faith, and Elijah lived it firsthand. And now think about Jesus. 6 days earlier, he had just announced his death. In Gethsemane, he would say, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." Matthew 26, verse 39. Jesus was about to face what Moses and Elijah faced. The temptation to give up, the weight of the calling, the darkness before the purpose, and God doesn't send him anonymous angels. He sends him the two men who had already been through it, the two who wanted to quit and didn't, the two who made it to the end, the two who are now standing in glory, as if telling him, "We were where you're about to be, and look at us now. We're here, in the light. On the other side of suffering there is glory, and it's worth every tear." If this is blowing your mind, hit like on the video and share it with someone who needs to hear this, because what comes next is even more powerful. Luke adds a detail that Matthew and Mark omit. Luke 9, verse 31. Who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. The word Luke uses for decease in the original Greek is exodon, exodus. It's not a casual word. It's the same word that describes the foundational event of Israel, the departure from Egypt, the liberation from slavery, the crossing of the sea, the birth of a nation. Moses and Elijah were not having a casual chat with Jesus about the weather in Jerusalem. They were talking about his exodus, his departure, his death, resurrection, and ascension as a single liberating event. And Luke deliberately uses the word exodon, so you understand that what Jesus was about to do in Jerusalem was the true exodus, the definitive exodus, not from Egypt, but from sin. Not through the Red Sea, but through death itself. But here, there's something you need to understand about Hebrew law to grasp the depth of what was happening. Deuteronomy 19, verse 15. One witness shall not rise against a man concerning any iniquity or any sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter shall be established. 2 or 3 witnesses. That was the foundation of the Hebrew judicial system. No sentence could be carried out without the confirmation of at least 2 witnesses. And on that mountain there were exactly 2, Moses and Elijah. Think of it this way. Jesus was about to execute the most important plan in the history of the universe. The cross, redemption, the rescue of all humanity. And before that plan was executed, heaven convened a hearing, a court, with 2 qualified witnesses, and this is not a forced reading. It is the exact legal language of the Old Testament applied to a New Testament event. Because in the Hebrew system, witnesses didn't just confirm facts, witnesses authorized sentences. Without witnesses, there was no condemnation. Without witnesses, there was no liberation. Testimony was what activated justice, and on that mountain, 2 witnesses activated the greatest justice in history. Moses, the author of the law, testified that Jesus was the fulfillment of everything the Torah announced. Every lamb sacrificed in Exodus 12 pointed to this man. Every ritual of the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16 foreshadowed what this man would do on the cross. The bronze serpent lifted in the wilderness in Numbers 21 was a shadow of what this man would be at Golgotha. John 3, verse 14. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Moses wrote the shadow. Jesus was the reality, and Moses was there to say, "It's him." Everything I wrote pointed here. Elijah, the greatest of the prophets, testified that Jesus was the one all the prophets had spoken about. Every messianic promise of Isaiah, every vision of the suffering servant, every announcement of the coming king, every word of Jeremiah about a new covenant, every image of Daniel about one like a son of man coming on the clouds, everything pointed to this man. And Elijah was there to say, "It's him." The entire prophetic voice of Israel finds its fulfillment in this person. It wasn't a courtesy visit, it was a legal certification. The two pillars of the Old Testament, the law and the prophets, gave formal testimony that the plan could proceed. The sentence was confirmed, the lamb was identified, the cross had the green light. And right in the middle of this moment, Peter opens his mouth. Matthew 17, verse 4. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. 3 tents, 3 equal tabernacles, one for Jesus, one for Moses, one for Elijah." Peter, without knowing it, had just committed one of the most serious theological errors in the New Testament. He put Jesus on the same level as Moses and Elijah. 3 equal tents, 3 equivalent teachers, 3 figures of the same rank. Mark adds something revealing, Mark 9, verse 6. "Because he did not know what to say, for they were greatly afraid." Peter spoke out of fear. He spoke because he didn't know what to say. And when you don't know what to say but speak anyway, you generally say exactly what you shouldn't. But there's something even deeper in Peter's proposal. The Greek word he uses for tabernacles is skene. Tabernacle, sacred tent. The same term used for the tabernacle of Moses in the wilderness. Peter was proposing to build 3 sanctuaries, 3 places of worship, as if the glory of God could be divided into 3 human structures. As if the Word made flesh needed a camping tent to contain his presence. And here's something few people connect. Peter said this during the Feast of Tabernacles. Many scholars, including Alfred Edersheim in his work, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, place the Transfiguration in the context of Sukkot, the feast where Israel built temporary shelters to remember the 40 years in the desert. Peter wasn't inventing the idea of tents out of nowhere. He was applying a known tradition, but he was applying it catastrophically, because the point of the Feast of Tabernacles wasn't to stay in the tent. It was to remember that God walked with his people. And on that mountain, God didn't need a tent. God was walking with them, in person, with skin, eyes, and a face that shone like the sun. The Father's response was immediate and interrupted Peter mid-speech. Matthew 17, verse 5. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud, saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." While he was still speaking, the Father didn't wait for Peter to finish. He cut him off. And what he said demolishes Peter's proposal from the very first word. "This is my Son, not my servant like Moses, not my prophet like Elijah, my Son." Peter had just proposed 3 equal tents. The Father just said that's impossible. Moses was faithful as a servant in God's house, Hebrews 3 verse 5, but Christ is faithful as a son over his house, Hebrews 3 verse 6. The difference between servant and son is not one of degree, it's one of nature. A servant obeys the house, a son inherits the house. And the Father adds something that crushes any doubt, "in whom I am well pleased." Do you know what that means? That the law could not satisfy the Father, it could not make anyone perfect, Hebrews 7 verse 19. The prophets pointed but did not fulfill, only the Son. In him all the Father's pleasure rests, and he finishes with 3 words that change the history of Revelation forever. Hear him, not them. Not Moses and Elijah and Jesus. Him, singular, exclusive. From this moment on, There is only one authorized voice, and that voice is the Son's. Moses can come down from the mountain. Elijah can return to glory. Their testimony has been recorded. Now authority passes to one alone. If that shook something inside you, subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment with the part that impacted you the most, because every week there's a discovery like this that changes the way you read the Bible. And notice the detail of the cloud. A bright cloud overshadowed them, not a dark cloud, not a storm cloud, a luminous cloud. The same Shekinah, the visible glory of God, that filled the tabernacle in Exodus 40, verse 34. The cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel. The same presence that guided Israel in the desert as a pillar of cloud and fire now descends on a mountain in Galilee and covers 3 terrified men and 1 glorified son. There's something here that requires you to understand the history of the temple to grasp the magnitude of the moment. When Solomon finished building the first temple, the glory of God descended and filled the building. 2 Chronicles 5, verse 14. And the priests could not continue ministering because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of God. The presence was so dense that no one could remain standing. But that temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC, and when the second temple was built decades later, under Zerubbabel, rabbinic tradition records something devastating. The Shekinah did not return. The Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Yoma, page 21b, lists 5 things that were in the first temple but missing from the second, and the first on the list is the Shekinah. For more than 500 years, the visible glory of God did not dwell in any place on earth. The second temple was empty of the presence that made it sacred, and now, on a mountain in Galilee, the Shekinah reappears. Not in a building, not over an ark, over a person. The cloud of glory that left Solomon's temple, that did not dwell in Herod's temple, descends upon the body of a carpenter from Nazareth. Because the true temple was never a building, the true temple was always a person. John 2, verse 21. But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Peter was proposing to build tents to contain God, and God responded with a cloud that covered him. Peter wanted to enclose the glory. The glory enveloped Peter. The difference between religion and relationship is in that image. Religion builds structures for God. Relationship discovers that God has covered you. Verse 6. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. Of course they were afraid. They were in the middle of something no human being had ever experienced. The audible voice of the Father, the visible glory of the Son, the bodily presence of Moses and Elijah, and the cloud of the Shekinah. All at the same time, on the same mountain, meters away. The weight of the glory was unbearable. And then, verse 7. But Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise and do not be afraid. He came to them. He touched them. He didn't shout at them from above. He didn't rebuke them for their weakness. He came to them. The same Jesus whose face had just shone like the sun bends down and touches 3 men trembling on the ground. That is the gospel in one image. Glory that stoops, majesty that touches, the sun that bends toward the dust. Verse 8. When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Moses was gone, Elijah was gone. The cloud had dissipated, the voice had gone silent. Only Jesus remained. And that image is the summary of all New Testament theology. When the law fulfills its function, it disappears. When the prophets give their testimony, they withdraw. What remains is Jesus alone. Hebrews 1, verses 1 through 2. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son. But the story doesn't end at the summit. The story comes down from the mountain. And what happens below is as important as what happened above. Because the path of descent reveals something the modern church has almost completely forgotten. Matthew 17, verse 9. Now as they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, "Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead." Tell no one. Jesus has just experienced the most glorious moment of his earthly ministry, and the first thing he says is, keep it to yourselves. Why? Because glory without context is dangerous. If the disciples had come down shouting that Jesus was shining like the sun and that Moses and Elijah had appeared, the crowd would have tried to crown him king by force, as they had already tried to do in John 6, verse 15, after the multiplication of the loaves. The glory of the Transfiguration would only make sense after the cross and the resurrection. Without the cross, the Transfiguration would be merely a spectacle. With the cross, it becomes a promise. And notice that Jesus said, "Until the Son of Man is risen from the dead." Mark 9, verse 10 adds that the disciples questioned among themselves what rising from the dead meant. They had just seen Moses risen from among the dead. They had just seen the glory of the resurrection embodied in him. But they couldn't connect the dots. Sometimes God shows you the answer before you understand the question, and you spend months, years, without realizing you already saw it. Matthew 17, verses 14 and 15. And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him and saying, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him." Above, on the mountain, indescribable glory. Below, at the foot of the mountain, a desperate father with a possessed son and 9 disciples who failed. Above, the visible presence of God. Below, the visible absence of power. The contrast is brutal, and it is absolutely intentional. Mark 9, verse 21 adds a detail that breaks your heart. Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And the father answered, from childhood. This father had been at it for years, perhaps a decade, perhaps more. Watching his son fall into convulsions, pulling him out of the fire, pulling him out of the water, night after night, day after day, without rest, without hope. And when he finally finds Jesus' disciples, the answer is, we can't. Do you know how many people are living exactly that right now? Years carrying something they can't resolve, years looking for answers that don't come, years bringing their child, their marriage, their business, their health to people who claim to represent God, but who can't do anything. And the frustration accumulates until it becomes despair, because that's what the life of faith is like. You can't live on the mountaintop. You can't stay in permanent glory. Peter wanted to build tents to stay up there. But Jesus knew that below there was a boy who was burning and a father who was weeping. The Transfiguration was not a destination. It was a stop, a recharge, a reminder of who you are before going down to the valley where it hurts. And look at Jesus' response in verse 17. "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me." There's frustration in those words. There's pain, but there's something more that nobody points out. There's urgency. Bring him here to me. He doesn't say, "Let me think about it." He doesn't say, "Let me consult with the Father." He says, "Bring him to me now." The compassion of Jesus doesn't wait. The compassion of Jesus doesn't set conditions. The compassion of Jesus comes down from the mountain of glory and enters directly into the mud of human suffering. Jesus had just been in the glory, had just conversed with Moses and Elijah about his exodus, had just heard the voice of the Father confirming his identity, and he comes down to find the unbelief of his own disciples. The chasm between the summit and the valley is the chasm between what God offers and what we believe is possible. And when the disciples ask him privately why they couldn't cast out the demon, Jesus says something that connects directly with what had just happened above. Verse 20. Because of your unbelief, for assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. To this mountain. Jesus has just come down from a mountain where the glory of God was revealed, and now he speaks of moving mountains with faith. It's not a generic metaphor, it's a direct lesson. The faith you saw above is the faith you need below. And there's a detail in Mark 9, verse 29, that adds another dimension. This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting are not magical techniques. They are forms of radical dependence. They are the human way of saying, I can't, but God can. And that is exactly what the 9 disciples at the foot of the mountain had not understood. They tried to resolve the problem with their own ability, with the authority Jesus had delegated to them in Matthew 10. But delegated authority without continuous dependence becomes an empty formula. It's like having the keys to a car but no gas. And you know what the most ironic part is? While the 9 disciples were failing below, the 3 who were above didn't do anything heroic either. Peter proposed tents. All 3 fell in terror. None of them understood what was happening. The difference between those above and those below wasn't competence. It was proximity. Those above were close to Jesus. Those below tried to function far from him. And that is the only difference that matters in the life of faith. Not how much you know, not how much you can do, how close you are. Now let's bring all the layers together, because what I'm going to show you now is the complete picture, and when you see it whole, the transfiguration will never be the same for you. Jesus needed to meet with Moses and Elijah, and the first reason is legal. Deuteronomy 19:15 required 2 witnesses to validate any important matter. Moses and Elijah certified that Jesus was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Without that certification, the plan of the cross had no backing from the old covenant. But it wasn't just legal, it was prophetic. Malachi 4 verses 4 through 6, the last words of the Old Testament, announced that Moses and Elijah would be relevant before the great day of the Lord. The Transfiguration was the partial fulfillment of that prophecy, the last words of God before the silence materialized on a mountain in Galilee centuries later. And the layer nobody mentions, it was emotional. Jesus was 6 days removed from having announced his death for the first time. Moses and Elijah, the 2 men who wanted to quit and were sustained by God, came to confirm to him that the road to the cross, though unbearable, ended in glory. They knew it. Because they were in the glory, they didn't come to give him information. They came to give him strength. Their presence was the living proof that on the other side of suffering there is light. And above all of that, the Father needed to speak, not just for the disciples, also for the Son. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Before Gethsemane, before the trial, before the scourging, before the cross, the Father tells the Son, you please me, I am with you. And that phrase is not new information for Jesus. The Father had already told him at the baptism, Matthew 3 verse 17, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, the same words. But the context changes everything. At the baptism, he said them at the beginning of the ministry, before the temptations, before the crowds, before the miracles. It was a declaration of identity for the beginning. At the Transfiguration, he says them before the end, before the cross, before the tomb. It is a declaration of identity for the suffering. Because when you're on your way to the greatest pain of your life, you need to hear that you are loved. Not once, twice, 3 times, as many times as it takes. The voice of the Father on the Mount of Transfiguration is the anticipated echo of the answer he would give 3 days after the cross, the resurrection. If the Father was pleased before the cross, imagine what he felt after the resurrection. The Transfiguration was the trailer, the resurrection was the full movie. And there's one last detail that connects everything. 2 Peter 1, verses 16 through 18. Peter, the same Peter who wanted to build 3 tents, writes decades later, "But we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory when such a voice came to him from the excellent glory. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And we heard this voice, which came from heaven, when we were with him on the holy mountain." Peter wrote that at the end of his life, probably from Rome, probably knowing that he too was going to die crucified. And of all the experiences he had with Jesus, of all the miracles he saw, of all the teachings he heard, the moment Peter chooses as proof that Jesus was not a fable is the Transfiguration, not the multiplication of the loaves, not the walking on water, not the raising of Lazarus, the Transfiguration. Because on that mountain, Peter saw something no miracle could show. He saw the real nature of Jesus, not what Jesus could do, but what Jesus was. And that vision sustained him to his own cross. And here is what makes all of this so devastatingly personal. There are moments in life where everything goes dark, where the calling weighs more than you can bear, where the people you trust most tell you you're crazy or that you should give up, where the valley at the foot of the mountain seems more real than the glory of the summit. Moses had them, Elijah had them, Jesus had them, Peter had them, and if they had them, you're going to have them too. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. But look at what God did with each of them. To Moses in his worst moment, God said, "My presence will go with you." Exodus 33, verse 14. To Elijah under the broom tree, God sent an angel with food and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." 1 Kings 19, verse 7. To Jesus, on the mountain before the cross, God sent him the 2 witnesses and spoke to him from a cloud of light. To Peter, decades later, God gave him a memory so powerful he could write about it from the edge of his own death. God doesn't ignore your moments of breaking. He's not offended by your exhaustion. He's not scandalized by your doubt. God does what he did on the Mount of Transfiguration. He shows up. He sends witnesses. He speaks. And he says what the Son needed to hear and what you need to hear today. You are loved. You please me. Arise. If you needed to pause for a moment there, let me know in the comments which part of this video impacted you the most, because sometimes writing it down is the way to engrave it on your heart. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. We just discovered that the Transfiguration was not a spectacle, it was a court, a farewell, and a declaration of love from the Father to the Son before the cross. What you're going to see on screen now connects directly with this. It's a video that takes this revelation one step deeper, and I believe that after what you've just heard, you're ready to see it.